We probably do. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Jerusalem Writers Festival. I am truly delighted to introduce our two speakers this evening. Both have new books out in Hebrew. Both are fantastic writers of surreal, funny, heartbreaking fiction. The first is Paul Beatty, who is the first American to win the Man Booker Prize for his novel, The Sellout, which just came out in Hebrew translation under the title Hamashtap. The book also won the National Book Critics Circle Award and the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature. The Sellout is Beatty's fourth novel. He's also the author of 2 books of poetry and 2 anthologies, one of African-American humor and one of non-Black writers writing about Blackness, which came out just last week, and which I'm very eager to read. Well, it's on Amazon. He is an associate professor of writing at Columbia University and lives in New York. Edgar Keret.
It just gave me an idea that maybe I'll edit an anthology about non-Jewish people who write about circumcision. You want to write something for me?
I'm not sure if he's ready to talk about circumcision so early in the evening, but maybe we'll get there. So, Edgar Keret probably doesn't really need an introduction in this forum. He has a new book of short stories, Takala B'Ktzei Galaxia, which is his 6th. I have it in PDF form, which is why I'm not holding it in my hands, but it's up there for sale. He is also the author of a memoir, several children's books, graphic novels, and scripts for television and film. His books have been translated into more than 40 languages, and his many honors include the French Medallion for the Order of Arts and Letters and the Camera d'Or Prize from the Cannes Film Festival. Though I personally consider Edgar, your greatest achievement to be the fact that the narrowest house in the world, built in Warsaw, is in your honor and in your name, the Keret House.
Actually, I have a 12-year-old son, and it's very difficult to impress your child. So all the other things I tried that failed, but the fact that the house appears in the Guinness Book of Records, then it's something like, you know, I got his attention there.
Yeah, that's something you can work with. Yeah. Okay, so the title of this evening is politically incorrect, and I guess we will take this as our point of departure. Though that is not going to be the only topic we will be talking about tonight. Paul, you mock political correctness viciously in your novel, right? You take one stab after another at it, and I'm wondering, in the last couple of years, attacking political correctness has become a staple of the right wing in America, right? Attacking political correctness means attacking ideas of equality, tolerance, multiracial, multi-ethnic America. When you were writing this truly hilarious novel, were you sensing any of that? Were you sensing that attacks on political correctness were gaining some kind of political momentum that might make this term more relevant than it has ever been?
No, not really. I'm not really thinking about that. I don't know what political correctness means. I mean, I don't think I'm attacking anything. I'm kind of, if I am attacking anything, it's like just narrow-mindedness and short-sightedness. You know, it's not political correctness. And I think whatever that phrase means, I think, different factions, different ideologies have their own sense of political correctness. You know, there's a right-wing political correctness. There's a, supposed left-wing political correctness. So I'm not attacking that, It's, for me, it's just like this kind of myopic way of seeing the world.
Right, but you do like to make fun of empty gestures, right?
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing.
I mean, the person on the Grammy Award who's making sure that there's something for any black person. That's that you treat that as a form of it's a platitude, right? It's a way to actually hide the larger issues at stake and stop with symbols and kind of public gestures.
Yeah, I mean, the person that I'm really mocking and attacking is myself, really. So, no, seriously. I mean, it's about things that I care about or pretend to care about or would like to have cared about, So that's where it starts. And, yeah, I mean, you're talking about, I think there's a line in there about the Grammys and the people who sit around and make these weird, stupid decisions, But, I think in that passage, I think I'm going to get in so much trouble this trip. But
oh, no, it's hard to get in trouble here, actually. We speak about things in general much more openly, I think, than Americans do, honestly.
Yeah, I think there might be some truth to that. But it still doesn't matter. But it's, I don't remember much of what I write. But, in that bit, there's a bit about, people who sit around the tables, and it's the people who sat around the table and kind of planned apartheid, the people who sat around the table and planned what awards we were going to give out at the Grammys, and the people who planned around the table and at the Wannsee conference. All this kind of stuff to me is like this ridiculous, narrow-minded kind of thinking. So I'm not equating any of the events, but in my head, there's some similar problems.
Okay, I mean, I'm thinking. It's I've now been living with this book for a while, and for me, it almost goes without saying what's the general premise of it. But it might be worth repeating to this crowd, though. I have a sense that people know what it is that we're talking about. But the book is about a African American farmer in Los Angeles who brings back slavery and segregation as ways to save his failing African American neighborhood. It's hysterically funny, really, and you've said in other circumstances that you wanted to make yourself flinch, and you've definitely made me flinch, but in a very good way. I just told you before we started this conversation publicly that I teach U.S. history at Tel Aviv University, and I'd like to try to incorporate this book into a syllabus next year. And the one thing that might stop me from doing it is that I worry that students might take it seriously. Or, to put it more mildly, that I will spend all semester arguing with them over the psychological effects of slavery over decades and centuries. That this is an argument that I have with almost every class, whether there are residual effects, whether Stockholm syndrome exists over the course of generations. And I keep telling them, historians and sociologists have been working for decades now to show that is actually untrue. And I worry that, one read of your novel and it'll be much harder to make the case that these were not livable realities, and that they died at some point, and they have a long legacy, but they're no longer alive.
It contradicts a little bit what you said before about Israel being this really open-minded place.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I've had these conversations with American students too.
Well,
I just want to say that she didn't say it was an open-minded place, because
but
I would have
sorry.
argued. No, she said that we speak our minds,
Speak our minds.
but we speak our closed minds very loudly.
I mean, I think my sister used to be a playwright, and she said to me, because the common refrain is, "Oh, people are so stupid," but she's like, people are actually very smart, and I think one of the things that I try to do in anything I write really is to trust the reader, and I think. I think like that reaction, I can understand that fear a little bit, but I haven't seen any evidence of that, really. I think people kind of see through that aspect of the book, I think the book is kind of addressing that kind of thinking, I think. So I think the person who's that closed-minded is, those people are out there, I guess, but I don't
They're not an audience for you necessarily.
I don't know who's my audience. I just write, the people who pick up and read the book. I don't have like a certain segment that I'm trying to write to.
Okay. All right. So one of the reasons that we are having this conversation, all three of us, or that rather the two of you are in this conversation together, is because both of you are very, very funny. And yet, I found the most striking parallel between your books to be the presence of historical collective trauma in both of these narratives. And Edgar, I felt, I think, much more acutely about your writing that death is everywhere. You're obsessed with car crashes, right? You'll need to explain why car crashes, suicides, and then of course, always the Holocaust.
Well, both my parents were Holocaust survivors, and I think that I think in a couple of the stories there, the Holocaust is put as some kind of a benchmark. Like you're saying, it's I have a story there about an American couple that their marriage break up during a visit to Yad Vashem. So how can you feel sorry for yourself when you see?
I don't know why people are laughing. It's a very sad story.
No, it's very sad. So I think that when you're a child and you get hurt really bad, then you say, when my mother was my age, she saw her mother and kid brother killed in front of her eyes. And she cried, and that makes sense because this is what you cry for. But if I just got 5 stitches in my chin, it's nothing to cry about, So I think that there is something about this idea of kind of living in the shadow of something that is really horrible that can have all kinds of effects, both about suppressing your emotions or even sometimes seeing things that are not fair as something that you should make a big thing about it. Compared to the Holocaust, they just beat this guy up. So I think that it distorts something in your mind, and I think that when you are in a post-traumatic society, in one of my stories there is an email exchange, between two people.
That's very funny.
And it's basically it's about a person who wants to take his Holocaust surviving mother to an escape room. In Israel, we have this concept of escape room, and on Holocaust Memorial Day. And they say to him that they close down on Holocaust Memorial Day, and he says to them, my mother is a Holocaust survivor. She wants to forget the Holocaust. She doesn't want to see all the shows. So what, you're going to punish her some more? And the more that they say to him, we're doing it only because of municipal laws, or it's not our own discretion. He says, what, it's interesting to talk about laws and your own discretion when we speak about the Holocaust. Like, it's your lessons to Holocaust Memorial Day that you do what the municipality tells you. So very quickly it becomes some kind of a victimhood competition. Whose parents got prosecuted more, who got insulted more, who suffered more. And sometimes I think in the Israeli society it feels that it sucks all the air from the room. You can't just be there. We talked about politically correctness. So my wife is a female. She's a female. My wife. Scoop. So no,
she doesn't have to be.
No, but she happens to. Because it's the first time that Paul and me meet, so I want to be very exact about things. So no, I want to say that. Actually, I want to say my wife is a film director, but my English is so bad that it came out that she was a film. It's the only other F word that I know. So my wife was a female director. There was this kind of a feminist filmmakers organization, and they asked each filmmaker to pick up their female film director of the year, and she picked Pedro Almodovar because she thinks that that there was something about his works that represents femininity and that he understands what it is to be a female. So of course they were very angry at her, and and her answer didn't appear in the newspaper column, and they thought that she was sarcastic about their initiative. And this is how sometimes there's something about politically correctness that it makes the room smaller. It makes the space smaller because what it deals with is it's only with symptoms. It doesn't deal with problems. It's like kind of Paul and me. We can go into a place and want to get hired. And he'll go say refer to Paul as a Afro-American, and he will say that I'm Jewish. He won't say I'm a Kaik, okay? And he'll be very, very polite, and then he'll pick up a third guy. So I would rather people say what they think and be honest about their emotions, and this way there will be a way to deal with it instead of just people keeping some kind of a residue of what it is correct to say. I saw I think Ofir Okunis. You gotta meet this guy. He's amazing.
Why do you have to bring all of that in here?
So I saw Ofir Okunis, who's a member of the government, and he was talking about the Supreme Court here, and he's from the right wing, and a lot of people from the right wing, they don't like the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court raises all kinds of questions about morality and ethics, and it kind of stops us from moving forward, sometimes. So Phil Kunis talked about Esther Chayut. What would be the correct title?
She's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
And he says, האישה הזאת חצופה, how, I need you. This woman, she's so rude or what?
Impertinent.
Impertinent. I respect her a lot. And it was almost like saying, this bitch, I respect her a lot. And those assholes in the Supreme Court, which I think is very important for this country. So I say, what's the point? Like, there are some kind of buzzwords you're supposed to say and some kind of dance you're supposed to make. And under it, you can still be racist and fascist and not tolerant, but you're just kind of making those right movements. I don't think it's helpful.
Okay, I mean, this is, we can get stuck on this all evening.
We should talk more about Ofir Okunis.
Yeah, really. Now I have his, image stuck in my mind, and it's going to prevent me from thinking clearly. There's something to be said, though, for civility and for, at least to me, political correctness in America signifies at least a sense that something is wrong and that a white person should walk around with some sort of guilt or a sense of responsibility or acknowledgement of the crimes that his ethnicity has perpetrated against pretty much everyone else on the American continent. And that we are so far away from it. I feel like we are hundreds of years away from Jewish Israelis walking around with a sense of historical responsibility and shame and guilt about whatever it is that they've done here over the course of the past century.
Yeah, well, I wrote an op-ed after everything that happened with Kobe Maidan. I keep kind of name dropping all kinds of names.
This is this is very inside baseball. Go ahead.
So the idea was that he said one day that this day, because of things that happened in Gaza, he felt ashamed to be an Israeli. So they wanted to fire him from his job because you're not supposed to feel ashamed for being Israeli ever. And I wrote an op-ed about it, about the importance of shame in Jewish heritage. And they say that really in books 500 years ago they say that when everything else fails, shame is the last wall of defense for ethics. Because if you kind of feel awkward, then like I want to murder you, but I don't know, like I don't feel like it doesn't feel right. Then it could still protect you. And the idea is that we live in a society, I think both in Israel and with Trump as a representative in the US, where basically like shame was thrown out of the window. It's some kind of weakness. It's something like, I don't know, from the 80s, the 60s. We don't need it anymore, And this idea that people cannot feel ashamed for a collective, I think it's very, very dangerous, because the only way we can get better is if we feel ashamed about what we are. It's basically just putting the benchmark higher, saying we can be better.
I used to live in Berlin for a while, and what was interesting is, I had these friends about my age and more or less my political persuasion, and one of the things that they would say, I'm not allowed to say that I'm proud to be German. I can't say that. So they had a weird shame about not being able to be proud, and that was very interesting for me, because I was kind of thinking in a weird way it was so healthy in a weird way. But at the same time, at least there, it did foster some resentment, in that they were kind of told that you had to be shameful and thing. There's a thing of where you're born feeling shameful at some level from the start, and then there's a different thing of being told that you had to be ashamed of, who you are, what you've done. And it's a different kind of shame somehow. But when you said that, it just popped that.
But I can tell you something about, let's say, if you go to Germany or you go to Austria. So I think that that Hitler was Austrian, but if you go and you speak to many people in Austria, they said they were conquered during the Second World War. The Germans invaded them, they threw rice at them, but it didn't work, and the Germans stayed. so the idea is that I think that the Germans are shameful about their past, and Austrians are not that shameful about their past. And and if you look at what a right-wing politician allows themselves to say in Austria and what they allow themselves to do in Germany, or if even you see the political choices done by people, it shows you that there is something about change that that it's awkward, and I agree with you. Sometimes it's a priori and it kind of blocks you from being what you are, but it has also a very powerful, strong effect, because it's kind of a warning. It's saying, when people say to you, I know you're gonna fuck up. I know you're gonna fuck up, or by the end of the, I know, then it's annoying, and and it maybe doesn't let you go all the way, but at the same time, maybe people fuck up less when they say that to them.
I understand. I completely agree with you, but I'm just saying, I think one of the ways that Trump has gotten to where he's gotten is he's talking about a certain shame that he's unwilling to accept. That somehow Obama or whatever, I don't know, women exist, make him feel shameful somehow. And he's just refusing to deal with what you're talking about, which is kind of just asking why, Yeah. I agree with what you're saying. But I just think that shame can come from different places. There's an inherent shame.
But I agree with you completely that there is something about, that there are sometimes dynamics that it's a little bit like an object, like a knife. I can use a knife to operate on somebody and save his life, and I can use a knife to stab him. So I think that also many times emotions can be distorted in a way that will be destructive. But the fact that they exist kind of for a reason. I think that it's good that they're there.
So you mentioned Trump, and I don't want to,
You started it.
Right. I don't want to. No, seriously, I don't want to devote too much attention to him here. He's such a pathological attention addict, and I don't think we should give him our attention. But I do want to ask one question. There is a quote in your book on page, it's 149, I think, where you say something about white male privilege in this country, in that country, and the way that white men are feeling like they're losing ground, and the existence of a black president is proof of that. And I was really struck by that because this is a novel that came out in 2015, meaning you were working on it, for a couple of years or a few years before that. It's all before the crisis of white male privilege and its expression in the 2016 elections was anywhere in sight, and yet you saw something, and I'm wondering what it is that you saw. Can you pinpoint anything in culture and American public discourse in your own life that made you come up with that insight, which was just so far ahead of the curve in terms of identifying an important cultural strand?
No, I mean, it's, I think I see the same thing a lot of humorists see, which is people are full of shit, basically. It's just about
other humorists weren't talking about white male privilege.
Yeah, but it's all the same. It's like how you were talking about political correctness, and it's not like I disagree with you, but that sense of, white people should feel certain kind of shame, or, here is, Jewish Israelis, we should feel a certain kind of awareness about all these kind of things, not necessarily shame. And I think like all these things, they kind of discount this other, and I just don't always see that other. It's still about you. It's still about the power person, Anybody ever see this movie, Amistad? Yeah. The Spielberg movie. So there's a scene in this movie which, what's his name? Who's the old black guy? Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman goes into a slave ship, right? And he goes into this empty slave ship, the Amistad, and then he hears all the screams of terror of the slaves who've been terrorized on the ship, And I go, you never see a white person go in there and hear those fucking screams. You know what I mean? And it's just, to me, I can't really explain it, but it's just this weird kind of power centricity. It's not about race necessarily. It's just about power. And you just never see, there's just this assumption, like just the assumption that Morgan Freeman hears it, and I don't know who the white lead is in the movie, I don't remember, but that person doesn't hear the same thing. I mean, you were still there, you were talking about collective memory. And the notion of collective memory is only on the part of the suffered and not the people that inflict the suffering. To me, is kind of, I don't understand like how this kind of memory works. So it's not about like these certain events in the news or this happened. This is just how people fucking are, And it's just, this is ongoing. And I think the danger is that it's not a danger necessarily. Just again how people are. We're so short term all the time. And so it's not about like these little things in society. It's just, for me, it's, I read this, I think about this stuff every now and then. And I don't know, I was like in my mid-20s, and I read this Aristophanes play, The Frogs. And I'm reading this play, and I go, oh my God, all this shit is 2,500 years old. All of it. It's so old. And in a weird way, that was such a relief for me, because you were talking about like writing with a free mind. I was like, yeah, this shit's just gonna be around. It's not going anywhere,
Yeah, that's probably true.
Can I tell a Trump anecdote? No, me and Donald, we were going to a bar one day, and Donald was saying to me, no, I came to give a lecture in Michigan. And they sent a car to pick me up, and the guy at the car service, we talked a lot, and he was young, he was very nice. And I asked him who did he vote for in the last election, and he said, I voted for Donald Trump. And I said, and if there would be election now, would you vote for him again? And he said, yes. And I said to him, tell me, like, since the election, do you feel that anything in the world around you got better? And he said, no. So I said, so why are you going to vote for him again? And he says, because now they suffer too.
Right, that's very encouraging, Edgar. Thank you for sharing. All right, and another really interesting common thread that I saw in both of these books, as different as they are, is fatherhood. And Edgar, your book is full of terrible fathers. though I've heard you make the claim that you're actually an excellent father.
Well, I think most terrible father claims that.
Right. Now, Paul, is the father in your story a terrible father?
Yeah, I think in some ways. I think, sometimes in trying to do the right thing, it's much like what you were saying earlier. It's about this guy trying to protect his mom. It's you end up doing the wrong thing. Oftentimes, because you're instilling this worldview. You're just not giving the person like an opportunity to fail, or an opportunity to suffer a little bit, which happens in life. And so sometimes that can, so the father does these weird social experiments on his kid, and trying to protect the kid, he kind of beats the kid down, So yeah, he's a bad dad in some ways,
I know you're going to say no, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Were you consciously trying to create a figure of a terrible black father, but an omnipresent, overbearing, terrible black father, rather than, a missing, careless black father, the way that black fathers are often portrayed in the media and mocked and offended?
No.
No.
No, I mean, I just tried to create a character that it's like a little bit based on my mom. Me and my sisters are all left-handed.
Okay.
And there's no right-handed people in our family. Yeah. So my mom insists, she swears to God, that she tied our right hands behind our back. She wanted us to be right-brained or whatever left-handed or people are supposed to be. So that always really stuck with me. And then I have a friend who, her dad's a psychologist. And he didn't raise her like in the book, but there's a sense of trying to apply the theory to the kids,
Okay.
I'm just going to create these perfect little beings, And yeah, to raise somebody to be perfect is a problem, Yeah.
Okay, all right. I of course assumed something else, but that's a much better answer actually. Edgar, so why are all the fathers in your book so terrible? I mean, why have you become obsessed with this?
Well, when you spoke to me before the event and you said that you're one of the first readers of the books that I speak to, and you said, because the book is so new, and you said that it was so depressing and sad, and I wasn't aware of the fact that it was depressing and sad. So when you talk now about like horrible fathers, I don't think when I wrote it, I didn't think that they were horrible fathers, because I guess they were in a sense me, but I thought they were failing fathers, and I think that basically I fail in a lot of things, but it bothers me the most when I fail as a father, because just some choices that I made, and those failures seem to be more difficult. And I think that there is something about parenthood, is that that if you want to drive a scooter, you have to take lessons, and then they say, okay, you can ride a scooter, you can't ride a scooter, but to be a parent, like everybody can be a parent. There is no regulation about parenthood, and you can't even kind of test yourself, because it's funny when Shira and I we wanted to have a baby. The first thing we did, we wrote a children book together, and the logic behind it was to see if we have something that is part of both of us, that we both own, if we can be civil about it, if we won't fight or shout and we said, okay, we were able to write a children book. Maybe it will be okay with the kid too, But at least we tried to put ourselves through some kind of a test, and I think that there is this kind of thing that that there is a kid running around, and I think that the more that you feel that you've failed, and the more that you're hurting, the more you want to save it from him. You want him to have a better life.
Right. But I would like to emphasize that it's a very enjoyable book, and I recommend that everyone read it. But people are so lonely in these. I haven't read something of yours in a while, because I don't read children's books or graphic novels, and my sense, it was very, reading these two books together was interesting in that sense, because the people in your book seem incredibly alone in a society that is allegedly very communal, very familial, tribal, you know, when we want to criticize this aspect of the place we live in. But you're not supposed to feel alone in Tel Aviv. And just to tie it to Paul's book, LA is, you know, some of the kind of the happiest people I know felt incredibly alone in LA. And people leave LA because it's such a lonely place. And yet, your protagonist, Bon Bon, that's the nickname, there is no real name, is uniquely not alone. I mean, he has a community, and he has a sense that, you know, there are a lot of issues in the book, but loneliness in LA is not one of them.
Oh, that's weird. I see it sort of the opposite, but I mean, most books set in LA are about loneliness, if you think about it. There's so many books. And I don't see this book as being very different. And I think, I mean, apart from this woman that, you know, he's obsessed with, he does feel very alone, and he's not with her very much. I think he's a loner.
He's with her. I mean, when they're together, they seem fairly happy.
They get along. There's a... what are you asking me? I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't know if I'm musing about the fact that there's a sense of the density of human relationships in your book that I found striking, especially compared to this sense of detachment and solitude that I really felt in Edgar's stories. Though you're, you know, by no means a lonely man. If anything, is
I don't know. You know, sometimes that I have to write to figure out who I am. You know, and the truth is that really after speaking to you, I thought to myself, you know, maybe I'm sad and lonely. You know, and it kind of sank on me. It kind of made sense. You know, I said like, you know, I should speak to Yael less. But there is something about this loneliness, you know, it's not this kind of loneliness of people who live alone and don't speak to anybody. It's people who live in a very public space and are totally functioning in it, but feel that sometimes that there are things that they cannot communicate with others, and that there are places that they can't invite people into. And I think that there is something very existential about it. I think that it's like I cannot imagine human lives without thoughts of death. You know, it's part of life, and I think I cannot think of any feeling of togetherness without thinking about aloneness, of being alone, because I really feel that if there would be something about not being alone that would be so taken for granted, you know, that it would be like this kind of wallpaper, then we wouldn't yearn so much for friendship and for love. The reason that we want it so much is because we're walking a tightrope, you know, over this kind of this black hole, and we're afraid to fall into it, you know, and this fear is could actually be a compliment to what a companionship brings to people.
There's a good Kafka quote that I always like, which he says, it's something like, what do I have in common with the Jews when I don't have anything in common with myself? Mm-hmm. Which I really love that quote. It's, you know, it just speaks to like this sense of what loneliness and the assumptions that we make about community and ourselves and how we're supposed to be on the same plane. But, you know, I just love that quote. And it just, like, I mean, it's interesting that, like, how... Like, I think, like, all my characters are very solitary. They're just, you know, everything's spinning around them, but they're kind of not a part of anything, you know. And in this one, he's consciously not a part of anything. I don't really feel like talking about my book, so I'm going to show it.
You know, it just came out in Hebrew, so, you know, some questions do need to be asked. So what's the story with agriculture in the novel?
I mean, I'm from California.
Farmers in LA? Because
not that I know of, but, you know, I mean, I'm from Los Angeles, so I just drove cross country not so long ago, and as soon as you get to the California border, they stop you and they say, "Are you bringing any shitty fruit into our state?" They literally ask you that, and it just, like when I think of trying to, evoke LA, for me, produce has a lot to do with it, I don't even really like fruit that much, but
It has a huge presence in the novel.
yeah. I mean, one had to try to make the guy act like he's a farmer, and but it's.
Did you do research? I mean, because it seems actually like you pretty much know what that should feel and look and smell like.
Yeah, I mean, I have an imagination, so but some research definitely also. But it just made me think, like, I grew up and we had a peach tree in our backyard and a lemon tree, and my friends just used to love that fruit, and everything. And anyway, it's just a big thing, like breaking open pomegranates, and so a lot of times when I write about LA, there's some fruit in there somewhere, and and this is sort of like inspired by like this community in LA where my sister teaches in Compton. I have a good friend that is a principal in Compton, and I would just drive through there, and you would see people on horseback. Actually, the Times just did this New York Times did this photo essay on this neighborhood. So, but like I don't go there very often, but it just reminded me of occasionally you just see people on horseback in LA. Sometimes in rich neighborhoods in the Palisades, My mom used to do. Yeah, it's very strange, and my mom used to be really into horseback riding, and so she would drag us to polo games and shit. But then one day we were going to I guess they still have it, but they have this thing called the Watts Festival, and we drove there, and getting there we drove through Compton and just see these people, going to the store on horseback, in the middle of the street. Just really stuck with me. And then when I went to visit my friend Ronald, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this. So I started asking my sister about it, like, what's with the horses? And she just started telling me stories about like kids that would buy milk from the neighbors that owned a cow next door. It's just like smack in the middle of the city. Instead of buying milk from the store, they just bought it from their neighbors, And then, so I just started driving through there, and you see people like grazing their goats and stuff, and just, so I just tried to kind of reimagine that neighborhood. No one has farms that I know about, but that neighborhood has changed also, from white to black to mostly Latino now, but that part, it's, the agriculture aspect still stays the same. And it's just one of those things in LA, like there's echoes of so much of desert, of agriculture, just of the West, it's one of those places that's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, no, of course. I was thinking of the South, right? And you have a great line there, 40 acres and a fool, which I won't bother going into in detail because it's too much. There's too much explaining to do for people who haven't taken U.S. History 101. But it does feel like he does move from, right. The family does come from a
yeah, I think the father's from Kentucky or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a sense that, and that people who study LA, urban historians, see this connection between the southern United States and California, right? There is this kind of the Sun Belt that extends all the way from South Carolina into Los Angeles, and I sort of saw echoes of that, the idea of the successful African American farmer kind of come to life in LA.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I didn't realize how backwards LA was till I left LA and came back, and I was like, oh man, it's so rural in so many ways, and even, with the segregation of the city, I mean, there's just so many things, and some of the stuff is, like the police department, they really just brought in like these racist guys to just set, just to keep all these places, just to institutionalize, all this prejudice and discrimination. There's a lot of weird elements in the South, and this is a city that was segregated, by religion, by a lot of things, and
yeah. Okay. Edgar, you've been traveling a lot in the U.S., right? It's very obvious that you're starting to write about America, not to the same extent and not in the same depth that you write about Tel Aviv, but it's sort of creeping in there, right?
Yes, in the end, I think that I always write about people. It's always when I meet a person and I find him interesting and I see something in him that it looks like kind of like, that that symbolize some emotions or feelings that I know. And in the past few years, I've been traveling more, and I taught a little bit overseas, and I spent more time in the U.S. So I started meeting people in the U.S. that kind of invoked this thing in me, and I wrote few of my stories that take place in the U.S. Like sometimes it's Israel, or sometimes it's even a local guy, not a very believable one, but ones that I've tried to write.
So I mean, you know what story I'm going to ask about now. The story about the American soldier, and here once again we will mention the name of Donald Trump. The story takes place during the third Trump administration, and there's a fairly epic war going on in Mexico, but it's also with Russia and some other old-time 20th century players. And I was wondering what was going on in your mind. I mean, we're in the midst of the third Netanyahu administration, right? And then the end is nowhere in sight. Was that a way to talk about that? I mean, how are you trying to bridge all these things together in that story?
Well, I think I don't really have any American stories. Even when I write about the U.S., I write about something that is here. And the story is basically that the U.S. is you kind of figure it out only by the end of the story, but the story is that the U.S., they don't have enough soldiers anymore. And they start doing those commercials that in war zones they're gonna screen, you can catch the rarest Pokemon. so kids start joining the army because that you're gonna fly into a war zone, but you're gonna get a really, really rare Pokemon. And the things that got me into it was really like that my son was into the Pokemon Go thing, and they would do Pokemon fights. And there is something about when you see your kid, how excited he gets into a fight, and sometimes it can sound really vicious. Kill him, finish him, this kind of, or when he plays Battlefront, this video game, and you see this kind of thing coming out of him. And we live in a society where kids, when they're 18, they become soldiers, and I remember that there were friends from my class that were in an incident where they killed terrorists, and one of my classmates was ill that day, and he was furious. It was like should have been his beautiful day. He should have been there, when they shot a guy who had some explosive on him and he blew up, and he should have been there, but he missed it. He missed out on this thing, and all this kind of idea of violence and being young and being attracted to it, and sometimes being in a place where it's legitimate and in a place where it's not legitimate and everything. So all this idea of kind of playing games and killing people, and usually it's the young who goes to wars because when you're older, you're smart enough not to do everything that they tell you. But when you're young enough, especially the ways that wars are now, it feels like kind of a video game. So I wanted to talk about those two things, and it was easier for me to speak about it, like in the U.S. because it sounds kind of something more of an American idea to merchandise the war, But at the same time, I was trying to talk about what I feel that happens here, with young people around me and their feelings and experiences.
Though I mean, the permanence and dominance of violence in our lives is something that our generation has experienced to the same, if not to a greater extent, right? Do you see a younger generation who reads your books and engages with your stories for the first time? And you are taught, you're part of the curriculum, right, in the Israeli school system. Do you see it as, do you see them as thinking or experiencing violence in a different way than, people our age did, the Generation Xers, the children of the 60s and 70s?
Well, when I was young, we played like primitive video games. You know, we played Pac-Man. You know, and when he would take this pill, he became a cannibal, and he would eat those creatures alive. You know, like, and he would go around and massacre all those other guys who were running after him. But when we played it, we felt really okay about it. You know, and for me, it's very easy when I see my son playing video game, you know, to differentiate between violence in real life and basically hurting people than playing this kind of games that harms your skill and you ventilate all kind of angers through it, which seems to me perfectly fine. My wife doesn't feel the same. We always argue about it.
That's a fairly classic male-female split, I think. Which, of course, brings us to...
I can confess here. When I was a kid, I used to torture my teddy bear. You know, because...
Wow.
Because like I was the smallest among three. You know, my brother, was stronger than me. My sister was stronger than me, and the only one I could boss around was my teddy bear. So, like, let's say, sometimes like I would put him in one corner. And I would say to him, no, you can't sit on the sofa. I'm sorry. Like, and I would fucking with his mind. Like, and I was saying to him, I would put him with his face to the wall. I think, now, all those things, like, I don't think that all those things makes me kind of necessarily a bad person. But I think that it's good that I did it with my teddy bear and not with some kid sister or with a pet.
Oh, yeah. Or, with the Palestinians at the roadblock in the army, which brings me to some thoughts that I had about the way that violence functions in the sellout. I admit that my favorite scene in the book is in the gas station in Mississippi, and I'm not going to give it away, but it was my favorite, and I'm wondering whether there's a way in which police brutality is, of course, hovers above the novel in some way, in the same way I think that it hovers over African American life more generally, even if we look at the kind of bare statistics. But on the other hand, there are moments like that scene in the gas station where you would expect more violence, and there is none. And there are other moments in the book where you seem to sort of stave off the idea that violence is everywhere. And no, I mean, laughter takes over. Kindness is sort of a sense of tolerance where you'd least expect it. You're probably going to say that it's not intentional, right? That you weren't kind of moving the pieces on the board this way, but it must reflect something in your lived experience to have parts of life in LA seem so unbearably violent, watching your father dead on a road, and yet a scene like that in a gas station in Mississippi, which should be explosive, be so lighthearted and fun and full of, in some ways, love.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say here. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, the only reason, I guess, at the beginning of the book, I'm just trying to get rid of the character, really, so the kid's dad gets shot by the cops.
Right, so the kid's dad can't be in the book, right? I mean,
it's not about him, really.
Right.
It's not the violence that's hovering over the kid, it's his father, so... And some other stuff and some historical stuff.
Father is violent too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. Yeah, he is. So, I mean, look, America's a violent place. I mean, it just is. It always has been, in so many levels. And so, I was, like, the book came out, I was doing these, making these rounds, and there was all this news about police violence and the thing and all this kind of stuff. And there was it's different levels of interest to different people, but I happened to be talking to a young black kid journalist, And he was just so disappointed that I didn't really have anything. You know, for me, it was just a scene in the book. It took me 5 years to write that book, so that was something. You know, so for me, it's just all this stuff is just so ongoing, and it's. So I'm gonna say this here. So, this is maybe I shouldn't say it because now I forget like things go back. So my father was actually shot by the police. You know, but I don't know my dad. I'm not close to him. It's not a thing. And then so in the bits of the book that are not based on my father, but just based on this reimagination, that's like one thing that, you know, for me, like resonates. So when he was shot, I was in New York. My sister called me and told me what happened. And but she didn't talk. We didn't talk about, oh, the police shot our dad. And she was like, do you know what my dad said when the cops stopped him? He went, you don't know who my son is. Which to me is hilarious, but it's like, so there are things in there that to me are very funny, you know. But so when the book came out, you know, and you know, because police violence was in the news that week or that news cycle, whatever. I mean, I wasn't doing research for this. I was researching something else, and I was in this library in New York, and you know, flipping through a New York paper from like 1933. And in the paper was just all this stuff about the cops just shooting kids who had like broken a window or robbed a store, and the cops would just come and just gun the kids down the street, you know, black kids. And I was just, oh my God, this is just shit is just so fucking old. But you know, it's just one of those things where I just, you know, that kind of abuse is timeless, you know. And so, anyways, I don't know what I'm saying now, but. So I think there was a little bit of pressure on me to like talk about that and put that in the media, and you know, people are gonna be sympathetic and buy the book. And I was like, yeah, it's not that important to me really. You know, I don't want to talk about that. Yeah. You know, that's not the kind of sympathy I'm trying to generate. I'm not trying to generate that kind of sympathy.
I get a sense. I haven't read the anthology of African American humor that you edited. I just ordered it. But my sense was from looking at the description was that you were also bringing in writers who are considered to be decidedly unfunny, and showing them in their moments of writing humorously. And in some ways, what I'm getting from you, and you know, I'm probably wrong, but whatever, it's a friendly crowd. You're trying to find the ways in which an African American writer, intellectual, can just sort of be funny and write and write a book that is not constantly in conversation with whatever it is in the news, and yet you are trying to find ways in which these intellectuals who are, you know, the pride of African American history can just be funny too, right? People who engage with the larger issues on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes they are just funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it, and but so much of it for me is just like I'm just one of those people who just is always laughing at the wrong time, you know. So you know, I'm gonna tell a weird story. This is again. So there was a guy who did this really brilliant documentary about Nazi propaganda movies. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? So there's like some bunker where they keep all these movies in Germany. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, everybody knows about the Leni Riefenstahl movies, but I don't know.
So this is not just the Riefenstahl movies, but these are just all these. I mean, because you know this UFA, this German film company, made all these horrendous movies, you know. And so he's put all this stuff together, and I'm in New York watching this movie, and so again I'm always laughing at the wrong times. So there's shit about, you know, these Luftwaffe pilots singing their fucking fascist songs as they're dive bombing, and I'm just fucking busting up. But I'm the only person laughing. And there's one about the Rothschilds, you know, this movie about the Rothschilds, and, you know, they have a place in Berlin, they have a place in London. And he draws these lines, and it ends up being a Star of David. You know, it's like everything. And I am busting up. And then, I'm the only one laughing. I'm trying not to laugh because I know people are gonna be pissed. And so in the movie, he shows a scene of him showing these scenes in the movie to an audience here in Israel, at some university or some film festival or something. And those people are all cracking up. So I'm like, okay, it's just not me, you know. So, but then, interesting, like once he showed that scene in the movie, the people in the audience started laughing at that. You know, so these things are just always shifting, you know. And I think that's the stuff that I'm getting at, and like what you're talking about, this thing of who's funny, who's not funny, when are people funny, and so I'm just trying to broaden these lines a little bit, for myself first, and then hopefully for other people.
I can say that I used to write for a comedy show in Israel, the Chamber Quintet, החמישייה הקאמרית.
An all-time classic.
And I wrote to them a sketch, and the sketch was about the exploitation of the Holocaust by people in Israel. It was about an Israeli runner who runs in the running finals in Germany, and there are people from Israeli delegations that they ask that he run 10 meters less because his mother is a Holocaust survivor. It's the first time she returned to Germany. It's
Haven't the Jewish people suffered enough?
And they say to him, haven't the Jewish people suffered enough? And when the German says, it's against the law, they say, you technocrat, haven't you seen Schindler's List? Haven't the Jewish people suffered enough? And it was screened here in Israel, and I think some people didn't like it, but many people found it funny.
Most people, I would say, my age and over, can recite that skit by heart, right? That's
And what happened was that in some cultural night in Germany, a cultural institute had shown this sketch, and they were under investigation for broadcasting anti-Semitic materials. And the thing is, like, the fact that I was Jewish and that I was a child of Holocaust survivors kind of helped them to get out of this tight spot, So I think that there is something that with comedy much more than drama. It's all a question of context, May we laugh? Can we laugh? Is it okay to laugh now? And I think that actually this is why many times humor gets more dated than drama. Because I think, you talk about Aristophanes, I'm saying if I can read a tragic comedy, a Greek comedy and a Greek tragedy, I would say that for me the tragedy works just the same, but there's something about the comedy that is not as funny, because I think that it's like very much going to a line you're not supposed to cross and kind of jumping back and forth. And when history changes, those lines change, and things that looked very wild at these times or looked like as if you're crossing the border are now in the consensus, and other things just seems irrelevant. And I really feel that with comedy, there are those kind of movies that the same person would laugh in some circumstances, and would not laugh if he's wearing a suit, if his boss is next to him, if the room kind of is set in a different way.
all right. That's a great note to end on. Paul Beatty, Edgar Keret, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. תודה.
Both will be signing their books right outside. They're both fabulous. Go ahead and read them.